Fallout is a series that has made its mark on gaming, being one of the reasons Bethesda has remained in the public consciousness for so long, for better or for worse. If you haven't played any of the games, you likely only have a passing knowledge of the franchise, and with Amazon releasing the Fallout television series soon, I figured now would be an opportune time to talk about one of my favorite games and the series that it belongs to. In this video, I'll provide a quick summary of the series' timeline, a brief explanation of the world's major factions, and where a beginner looking to get into the series should start. Before we begin though, I've got to put a disclaimer here. I will not be talking about Fallout Shelter Online, Fallout Tactics, Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, or the cancelled Van Buren, as they're either not canon or not important enough to talk about. Somewhere around 2067, America got into an enormous conflict with China, this being the result of a worldwide energy crisis starting in the year 2050, which was caused by heavily depleted fossil fuels. Skipping over the less important details, the conflict came to a swift and bloody resolution in 2077, when China and the US traded nuclear strikes with each other that would forever change the two nations. While it is worth mentioning that other political powers armed with nuclear weapons were also hit, the Fallout series has only been seen taking place inside of the United States, with the exception of the upcoming non-canon fan project, Fallout London. After the bombs dropped, the games take place, with Fallout 76 being the earliest in the timeline, taking place in 2102. The entry follows a resident of Vault 76 who attempts to explore and recolonize a radiation-ridden Appalachia. If this isn't a terribly accurate summary of the game's plot, I'm sorry, but I'm not spending $60 on a video. Following this, the first Fallout game takes place in 2161. The game's first half revolves around the player character venturing out from Vault 13 in order to find a replacement computer chip to bring back the struggling Vault. Once they return, though, they're sent back out into the wasteland to deal with the concerning amount of super mutants throughout the Southern California wasteland. After this, the next game, Fallout 2, takes place in 2241. This entry is about a descendant of the protagonist of the first game, who's been given the title of The Chosen One. The goal in this game is to scour the wastes to find a terraforming device that could save the village. Once they get it and come back, though, the protagonist finds their entire village enslaved by remnants of the US government, which we'll talk about once we get to the section of factions in the video. This game, along with Fallout 1, are both extremely unfriendly to beginners, and I wouldn't consider them a good showcase of Bethesda's games. They're both extremely well made though, and are worth playing if you're willing to read a 121-page game manual. After that, Fallout 3 takes place only 17 years after the previous game, and has the protagonist escape Vault 101 and go looking for their father, who just disappeared. This entry isn't very PC friendly, as the Steam version straight up doesn't work on purchase and requires a whole side quest to get it running, so unless you're willing to go through that hell, I can't recommend it. The game, while being the first in the series to bring Fallout into 3D, is often overshadowed by its spin-off, New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas takes place in 2201 and revolves around a mailman who got shot in the head and gets into local politics. If you haven't played a Fallout game before, start with this entry, as it's both cheaper and easier to run than Fallout 4 and is a lot more fleshed out than Fallout 3 in terms of world building and options. The game is a decade old by this point though, so you may encounter a lot of bugs, both in the gameplay sense and the enemy sense. The final game chronologically as of right now is Fallout 4, which takes place in 2287 and revolves around the sole survivor of Vault 111 being cryogenically frozen while the bombs drop in 2077, and being unfrozen 210 years later to track down their kidnapped son and avenge the death of their spouse. I'd mentioned the Amazon series about now, but as of writing the script and recording, the in-universe date of the show isn't confirmed yet. Now that I'm done with the timeline, I'm going to talk about the major factions of the world in Fallout. The most important faction in the game series is one you never actually directly interact with, Vault-Tec. As the name suggests, this company is responsible for the creation of all of the number of vaults scattered throughout the United States, which are all social experiments with no regard to morality, though publicly they were presented as a way to preserve life, even after total atomic annihilation. Another corporation important to the Fallout universe is Robco. Headed by Robert House, this company is responsible for the creation of many of the most iconic devices and machines from the series, like the Stealth Boy, Securitrons, and Mr. Handys. While you can actually directly interact with them in the form of Mr. House's questline in Fallout New Vegas, most of the time their main contribution isn't direct and exists in the form of abandoned automatons across the wasteland. Speaking of abandoned machines, this leads us to the most iconic faction in the series, the Brotherhood of Steel. I personally don't like this faction much, as I consider them to be a bunch of culty weirdos, but I can admit they have the second coolest power armor in the series. The faction, whether by name or by uniform, is synonymous with Fallout, for better or for worse. They hold the banner of Fallout's good faction, most of the time being the morally superior or lesser of multiple evils to choose from in the games. The other major faction in the series is the Enclave. While Fallout is usually a very morally ambiguous series, the Enclave serves as the franchise's token bad guy faction. The Enclave is the remnants of the United States government, whose leaders hid in bunkers right before the bombs dropped onto the states. The difference between them and our government is that because of the limited amounts of people who were able to be in the bunkers, the president basically became a dictator, and the political and militaristic sections of the government fused together, along with good old American pride, to create a hyper-aggressive xenophobic society. They consider anyone not born in one of their bunkers to be un-American and corrupted by the radiation of the wasteland. Those four factions are the most important in the series, but are not the only ones who populate the wasteland. There are a lot of different factions throughout all the games, and while I like Fallout, I don't like it enough to make a 40-minute video on each. If you want that, just look it up, as there are many channels who specialize in that. So now that I'm done rambling about the lore aspects of the series, you'll be thinking, okay, but what game do I start with? The answer depends on what you want to get out of the series. If you're looking for a story-rich game with lots of replayability, play Fallout New Vegas. If you want a heavily gameplay-focused experience, play Fallout 4. If you are allergic to games in the third dimension though, and have a love for extremely complex games, I'd recommend either Fallout 1 or 2. From what I've heard, 2 is more streamlined and has a lot more quality of life add-ons that weren't in the first game, but 2's plot is partially set up by Fallout 1, so it would probably be best to begin with the first game rather than the second. With that being said, you can play whatever game you want or can afford. Each entry is very self-contained and can be jumped into without needing to know random obscure lore stuff. It definitely enhances the experience, but it's absolutely not required to enjoy the game. My personal favorite is Fallout New Vegas, and it's what I recommend to anyone looking to get into the series, or if they're just looking for a good RPG. I know this video is a lot shorter than my others, but I'm working on a longer project right now, which should be a bit lengthier. I don't have much to say here other than that I'm glad people seem to like the stuff I make, which is a bit surprising to me as I just make these so I can have some kind of hobby and so I can have a creative outlet. Also, if you like the thumbnail art on this and my previous video, go follow Krondusk on Instagram. He's a good friend of mine and he makes really cool stuff. I tend to use my community page a lot, so if you're wondering what the progress is on any video I'm working on, just check there. If you like the video, subscribe so you don't miss anything I put out, and remember, it's Deladius, not Deladius.